Okay, welcome.
We're live.
We are live. We are. This is my show, Bob.
It's very exciting. This is, for a kid who grew up on radio, whether it was QXR, classical New York, or whether it was WNEW in their original progressive rock format.
Yeah.
I behind the microphone and with the headset, I feel like I'm standing with the ghosts of Scott Muni and Allison Steele, and then all the people who worked at WFUV.
Nice.
This is the sound of my childhood, in those moments where you would go to the best place and the safest place and the most poetic place. So.
Beautiful, beautiful. Great way to start off with some memories. This is Bob Montera. Am I saying that right?
You are.
Bob Montera. I'm Dylan Kelehan. This podcast is sponsored by The Rock Shop, of course, where in beautiful downtown Nyack, The Rock Shop provides wonderful services to wonderful people, including Mr. Bob Montera, which is why he's here sharing this conversation with me, where we learn about Bob and his life. So, Bob,
I am a student here.
Yeah, Bob is a student.
A very happy student here.
Yes. So, Bob.
Can I say a little bit about that?
Yeah, feel free. Yes, sir. Go right ahead. Start there.
So I am on sabbatical this year. And my sabbatical from the Fieldston School in the Riverdale section of the Bronx. It's part of the ethical culture school system. And they had the wisdom to grant me a sabbatical for a project that I designed. And the project was a kind of a lifelong dream of learning how to play the guitar. And although I had some minimal experience with it, I knew 3 chords in 1972. Mm-hmm. Years and years passed, and I knew those same 3 chords. But the COVID pandemic put me in touch with guitars more, and I was picking them up. And I thought, wouldn't it be lovely to have a project where I could formally take lessons? And as a working class kid, I was always saving money. But here I was, approaching 70, and if I didn't take a sabbatical now, when would I ever take it? And the 3 considerations I had, the fanciful considerations. One, could I go to medical school during my sabbatical year? And because medicine has been a lifelong passion of mine and interest. Wow. And I thought, I can't do that because I haven't mastered the biochem and organic chemistry.
Right.
Could I become a rabbi? And I thought, well, I need to learn Hebrew before that for my lifelong interest in Judaism. Could I pick up the guitar? And that just seemed
right.
the most agreeable and easiest, but it's also the sort of place that music occupies in my life. And I remember wandering, and I wrote a proposal, and the school said, what a great idea.
Wow.
They had faith in me to do that.
That's fantastic.
And then I had to find a place for lessons.
Right.
And I wandered in here, and I encountered you.
Yes.
And I said, how do I do it?
Encounter is a great word when meeting a musician. Oh no, it's a musician.
And then you were just so open, and you said, tell me about what you like about music, or the kind of music that you listen to, and tell me what you're like as a learner, and I'm going to try to set you up with the ideal guitar teacher.
Right.
And you have Tom Clancy's the ideal guitar teacher.
Tom Clancy. Shout out to Mr. Tom Clancy.
Of Dead Meat.
Of Dead Meat. Yeah, we love you, Tom. You're the man. Tom's a writer as well as a musician. I'm sure you've learned that by now. And he actually was on my other podcast.
Oh, wow.
Fascinating. I'm sure you've realized this spending so much time with him. He's one of the most intelligent and well-spoken people I've ever met.
He's endlessly insightful, and he's always pulling out these tales of things that he's done. His work as a writer, his work as an editor. But even now, listening to his journey as a musician and the kinds of things that he's doing and experimenting with. As a teacher, he's absolutely wonderful. There are times when I understand only 25% of what he is saying initially.
Yes.
But it's left such an impression, and sometimes I'll film his finger work.
Right.
And over time, it'll accumulate. And then there are these other moments where the door just opens. And what I love about him is, if I don't get it, mm-hmm. he'll try 3, 4, 5, 6 until there's that moment. He'll find the level in the session, like where if I'm lost.
That's amazing.
And that's a great quality to have.
Sure. That's the beauty, too, of music and learning is there's no right way to do it, and there's no wrong way to do it. Everybody's different.
Yep.
And that's one of my philosophies here.
And I sense that with all of your teachers and all the people who who work here. They each seem unique. They each seem just so modest and kind.
Mm-hmm.
I remember walking in here for my very first class, which was right after Labor Day,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted the sabbatical to begin on that designated day. I treated the summer vacation as a summer vacation. And I came in here for my first lesson, and I was surrounded. It was a room of sort of 9, 10, 11-year-old girls, and they were all in pink with with tiaras and their guitars
Amazing.
or their sheet music. And I thought, this is my cohort.
Wow.
I finally found my level.
Wow. Glorious.
And I just thought, well, this is terrific.
It's terrific. It's fantastic. Well, thank you again, Bob. Let's take a pause on that, and we'll come back to where you are there, and let's revert back to the beginning of Bob.
Oh my God.
Where did you grow up, Bob?
I grew up in Corona, Queens,
Okay.
which is right by Citi Field. It's the neighborhood next to the Corona Meadows Flushing, park,
Mhm.
site of many World's Fairs. It's an old neighborhood in the New York area and in Queens. It has been largely when it came about, and even now, it is a blue collar, working class, immigrant, ethnic enclave, a large African American population going back to the end of the 19th century. The most famous person from that is Louis Armstrong. A lot of
All right.
African American jazz musicians were moving out to Jamaica, Queens
Mhm.
at one point, and Louis Armstrong's wife, Lucille, knew that Louis was more modest than that. So they settled in Queens because it was in Corona, because it was a working class neighborhood. And my grandfather would sometimes take me on the bus from I was on Penrod Street, so we'd catch the bus and go to Louis Armstrong's house, and he would be on the steps with his trumpet, and there'd be little kids hanging out listening to him play. And he always kept a roll of sort of dollar bills, and he would play, and at the end of playing, he would give the kids
Wow.
money.
That's an amazing story.
Remarkable guy.
Wow. And how old were you when this would be taking place?
I
with
was
your
small.
grandfather?
I was very small.
7.
Sort of between 4 and 10.
Oh, wow.
It became kind of a regular feature.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. So then, okay, you're
So
in
Corona,
Queens.
Queens.
Corona, Queens.
A proud Corona guy. My mom, who's 96, still lives in the same house that she grew up in, that I grew up in, that
Wow.
my great-grandmother purchased. It at one time had been a working farm.
Remarkable.
A modest little place. And I very much have a Corona identity, and a Queens identity is crucial in shaping how I see the world and who I am. I'm a local guy. And over the years, I've become slowly like a Nyack local guy.
That's amazing. So, okay, you got a mom. You must have a dad and brothers and sisters, or are you just an only child? Tell me about your family.
Well, the way I tease my sister is that I tell her I'm an only child.
Okay.
But she's wonderful. She's wonderful. Mary. There's a 10-year difference between us. But my mom is Veronica.
Mm-hmm.
My late father is Peter.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the building trades, a plasterer
Okay.
by profession. My mom was an executive secretary at the Pepsi-Cola company.
Oh, cool.
Late 1940s, early 1950s.
Okay.
And then became a homemaker. I lived in the same house with my great-grandmother, grandparents, and my parents. And when my great-grandmother passed away, we opened up the basement a little bit more. But I always had the benefit of sort of the eyes of the grandparents and the eyes of the parents
Wow.
to work with. My grandfather worked for the Department of Highways, so most of the big roads in Queens, he laid the asphalt and supervised that.
Incredible.
And my grandmother Tootie, oh my God, Miss Sweet Tooth of the Universe, when she retired from the business world, she made pies on a Monday, cakes on a Tuesday, cookies on a Wednesday. Repeat the cycle so that my sense of the house was it was confection. It was sugar. It was freshly baked, everything. And she rarely ate other kinds of food. A good Roman Catholic girl who largely lived on the Eucharist of baked products. Right? So great way to have a childhood.
That's amazing and very American. very American upbringing. I mean, you could pick that out of a book,
Yes.
and you could say, okay, this is how Bob. That's incredible. And then, okay, you decide you're 15, 16, 17. What makes you go? Where are you going to school? Are you on the path of becoming an educator? Where are you?
Oh
in
wow.
teens?
Well, I would say even before that, the public school that I attended on Otis Avenue and 108th Street was PS 14.
Okay.
And that's the public school that my mother went to, and that's the public school that my grandfather went to, and it was a couple of blocks away. And I would kind of follow in my mom's footsteps eventually, because I went to Newtown High School in Elmhurst, Queens. She graduated in 1945. I graduated in 1972. I went to my 50th anniversary not long ago, which was wonderful. I had great teachers there. One recently passed away, a real mentor, John Puimari, a great history teacher, who in ninth grade kind of opened up the world as an intellectual thing to study. And on the 100th anniversary of the First World War, a number of us Newtown graduates who had Mr. Puimari as a teacher remembered vividly his lessons on the origins of World War I. And I got his number and called him up the next day and revived a friendship
Amazing.
with him. And the other great teacher was Bernadette Russo, my English teacher, who began the first class I ever had her with was a modern world literature, and she said the modern literature begins with Shakespeare's Hamlet. And I thought, what a bold statement! What does it mean? And she was endlessly fascinating in every class that she had.
Wow.
But so PS 14, Leonardo da Vinci, Independent School, 61, and then Newtown High School. I had a love of literature, a love of history. As a working class kid, I had working class pride, so I got a job early working in a hardware store, and learned a lot about electronics and plumbing and salesmanship, and selling things like Farberware and making keys and cutting pipe. But I also thought the school directed me to something academic, and the public library system in Queens and later in Manhattan were places where I took refuge and spent hours and hours reading. And my mother, her greatest gift to me was teaching me how to read. When the school at one point told me I was a poor reader, my mother took me under her wing and said, "I will teach you how to read," and blossomed. So all of these forces came together, and I had a wonderful time at Newtown High School, which is still a wonderful high school where there are 75 languages, kind of spoken, and it's a remarkable staff of teachers. And then I went to college, and the story that I like to tell. Can you tell I like telling stories?
I can tell.
The story.
I love it. I can tell that you
The
can
story.
tell. You know
I
that
love
you like to tell stories, but you're great at it. You're terrific at it.
And I tell this to all of my students when they worry about college. I applied to 8 colleges. There was one college counselor at Newtown. I applied to 8 colleges. I got rejections from 7 colleges.
Ooh.
And the school that accepted me was Columbia University. And I had applied to so many of the great state colleges and some of the other colleges and just rejected. While I was a good student, I wasn't a brilliant student. But what made the difference, with Columbia? I think part of it was the essays that I wrote, the interview that I had. But behind the scenes was this English teacher, Bernadette Russo, who wrote the recommendation for Columbia.
Oh, I see.
And I've always credited her with the person who opened the door at Columbia, where she had been a graduate student, was Bernadette Russo. So she made that possible. And then, all of a sudden, I was notified by the United Federation of Teachers that I had a scholarship.
Oh, amazing.
And how to pay for Columbia was like a big issue, even in 1972 dollars. But I suddenly had a scholarship from the United Federation of Teachers. And the reason I had that is that Bernadette Russo applied for me. She did all the paperwork. It was a recommendation.
On your behalf.
On my behalf. So as a poor working class kid, she went the distance, filled that stuff out. and that made going to college, possible.
That's incredible. So what an impact one teacher can
Yep.
have on somebody's life. And it's a little bit about what we do here. We're different kinds of teachers here. It's just amazing to hear it coming from somebody like you as well, who's in the teaching world, and that one teacher and the culmination of
Yes.
all the various other teachers and the culmination of all the various things that led you into those schools could make a huge, significant impact in
Yeah.
your life. Right. Okay, great. You're in Columbia now. You're studying what? What are you studying in Columbia? Are you studying history? Are you studying English? Literature? What do you
I'm largely studying history.
Okay.
Um,
Anything
I'm-
specific with the history? Besides, you mentioned World War I. Is there just like
I've-
world
I've-
history?
I'd like to think that then, and even now, that I was somewhat of I became a generalist. I was interested in everything.
Okay.
The things that motivated me at first is I'd read a book by Edward Thompson called The Making of the English Working Class. So I wanted to understand something more about the class experience, both internationally and within the United States. I'd been inspired by a fellow who wrote about anarchists, and I thought I'd like to know about that as a movement. So that set me in motion. But Columbia opened me up to the sort of the great books and the classics and world literature, and I had a number of just wonderful teachers. From George Stade in English to Florian Stuber, a wonderful fellow from Buffalo, New York, who was my freshman seminar teacher. And I thought I knew how to write. And at a high school level, I was a great writer, but I was only a great high school writer. Florian Stuber was the person who took me to the next level and was just demanding. And when you got an essay back from him, there were just slash marks and rewriting and keeping journal experiences. But the thing that also happened that year was that in this freshman freshman seminar class, we read one book as our way of learning how to do things. We read Charles Dickens's Our Mutual Friend.
Mm-hmm.
And we kept journals, and we wrote essays about what we read over the course of the week. And we had 2 days of discussion, but then we had 2 days in which we read aloud. So we closed the week out reading aloud as a group of sort of 15 young men and women. And I was terrified of reading aloud, and everyone was painfully self-conscious. But the art of reading aloud sucked us into a dimension of reading and of literature, that all of a sudden there was music, and it became a course that was dramatic, and it was a gateway to thinking about theater. So long before Harry Potter on tape and long before audiobooks, the notion of reading as performance with a group of your peers, and then just learning to marvel at the many ways in which something could be read, so that we looked forward. We went from fear into looking forward to these reading aloud sessions, and I owe that gift to Florian. And while I'm doing all of those things, I'm working full-time at the New York Public Library.
Oh, great. What are you doing there?
I am working in the periodicals room under Mr. Joseph Stasko, who was a refugee immigrant from Czechoslovakia. He had been imprisoned by the Nazis. He had been imprisoned by the Soviets. He'd managed to escape. He came to the United States, fellow with multiple degrees. But in the United States, they wouldn't let him practice law immediately. They wanted him to go back to school. So the place where he was able to get a job was the New York Public Library, because he knew only 10 languages.
Only 10?
and just the most this erudite, benevolent, demanding fellow. So I'm magazines are coming in. I'm checking them in periodicals, journals of various sorts in room 108, and I get really good at it. And one night Stasko pulls me over, because I'm largely working night shifts and weekends. He goes, buddy, come here, buddy. He says, all of these are yours. I said, what do you mean? He said, if you come in every day and finish your work fast. As soon as you finish your work, I open the room up to you to read. I give you the gift of these publications, right? And I've always referred to it as the Stasko Fellowship. And I worked really hard. I loved working at the New York Public Library. I donate to the New York Public Library. I believe in the New York Public Library, and I believe in libraries. At my school, at the Fieldston School, we have a marvelous library and the most wonderful librarians. And my experience with libraries goes back to Mrs. Lieberman at PS14, and working in the school library at Intermediate School 61, and a little bit at Newtown High School. But the New York Public Library was endless possibilities and filled with like chambers and collections. And I would be loaned out periodically by Mr. Stasko to one of the other divisions. So I got to see how things were like in science and technology, or in the Jewish division, or in rare books. And there was one point where I was like a gopher in room 315 for some of the researchers and in some of the smaller rooms. And I got to retrieve books for Barbara Tuchman, the great historian who wrote books like The Guns of August and Stilwell and the American Experience in China. I think she was working on A Distant Mirror, and Susan Brownmuller, who had worked on Against Our Will. But I got to fetch books for them and other writers like them. And when no one was around, I would sneak into one room where they had Charles Dickens's writing desk, and I would sit at his desk.
Wow.
Right? So college is happening, and every day I go down and work at the public library. So Columbia is my college, and the New York Public Library is part of what I would think of the greater educational experience for me, as well as a paycheck. There's nothing better than working when you're in college, right? Don't be some intern for free.
Right. Make some money.
Make some money, because that money and the input you get from supervisors is really formative.
Are you living at home during all this, or are you?
So for freshman year, going into the fall semester of my sophomore year, I'm a commuter, and I'm taking the number 7 to the number 1 early in the morning, coming home late at night, and I realized. And then working near a public library. That's exhausting.
Right.
So I moved onto campus.
Excellent.
And that was hard for my mom, and for my parents. It was a big shift.
Sure.
But it was absolutely necessary. And I'd like to say that in some ways, although Corona and Columbia are only 10 miles away on the map, it was like 1,000 miles, like the journey to take. But I moved onto campus, and what's nice if you're in a working class Italian American family is the going home for Sunday dinner.
Of course.
So the pasta was waiting. Sometimes I'd bring laundry to do while I was home, but it was nice to have that connection from where I grew up to where I was, to be able to see my family and my grandparents, as they aged. That was a wonderful experience to have. So I had a lot of things going on, and then just New York City was my playground. This is New York in the 70s.
Wild.
It's free concerts in Central Park. It's the Schaefer Music Festival. It's CBGB's. It's the Academy of Music. It's the Fillmore.
The Village.
It's the Village. It's the Village. It's seeing people like Doc Watson, Steve Goodman, John Prine, in the Village. It's the early punk bands. It's seeing Lou Reed, and it's the bar scene. So there's a lot of experimentation that's going on, and you're just it becomes part of your journey, part of your education. And I'm partying. I'm partying
Bob's
hard.
throwing down.
And as my friend, the late Peter Dervis, who was a historian of costumes and a museum curator, as Peter Dervis would say, I was the only person who could party hard, not sleep, and yet do all of the reading and show up for all of his classes thoroughly prepared. I think there was one year in which I went without sleep.
Of course.
I thought, well, do you really need sleep?
That's what as one does when they're at that age.
And I think it might have been the same year that I thought, how much, if I lived on pizza and beer.
Yeah.
Pizza contains all of the food groups if
Sure.
you vary it enough. That might have been the year in which, I gained 30 pounds, had a wonderful belly, and grew a mountain man styled beard like Grizzly Adams.
Incredible.
But it was exciting.
Yes.
It was exciting. And to sort of, even on that very first day at Columbia, to meet people from all over the world.
Yeah.
Was breathtaking, and to have experiences for the first time, to go to your first dinner party invited by a professor from the university, and to be 6 floors up on Riverside Drive, looking out at the sun setting.
For a young man, incredible.
For a young man,
What an incredible experience!
right? Discovering the museums, discovering Harlem and the music scene in Harlem. And again, this is 1972, 73, 74, 75. So,
Drinking age is still 18.
the drinking age is 18, and the voting age is 18, and that was new.
Right, and everybody's probably protesting, and there's all sorts of stuff going on in
There's,
New York City that you could take part in.
That's right. Lots of demonstrations, hanging out with some folks who are very political, and then other folks who are just into music. And I fell into a group of friends from the New York Public Library who were deadheads.
Right.
And I'd been a deadhead from junior high school. And like my first concerts were when I was 10, and I saw Dylan and Joan Baez and Simon and Garfunkel. So I was following music very avidly, but I became a deadhead also very early on. And a bunch of guys from the New York Public Library are deadheads, and they have acoustic guitars, and they're playing acoustic music. So to go on a lunch break is,
What a treat!
what a treat.
You're just hanging out with your boys.
And I was
jamming.
inspired by them, but I never thought I could do that.
Right, you can, and everyone can.
And you can, and you can,
Everyone can.
and you can.
And it should, and everyone should. Is another thing. It's so good for you.
And even right now, part of my learning experience is, you asked and Tom asked, if there are guitarists out there that you would like to sound like or imitate or have inspired you. Jerry Garcia, Doc Watson, David Bromberg. So one of the neat things, I have a familiarity with the music. I know what it should sound like, and Tom helps move me in that direction. But oh my God, what a music scene!
What a scene!
What a music scene!
Wow, you're so lucky to have grown up during that time and be in New York City.
Yep.
In the 70s.
Yep.
When it was just chaos and insanity and but amazing. But
And people were wary of the city.
Sure, of course they were.
There was fear. The perception in the media very often sort of talk about crime and things falling apart. And New York was in a state of disrepair. There had been years and years of deferred maintenance, and neglect. It was a city in transition.
Right.
So that there were neighborhoods that had once thrived were now a part of the deindustrialization and were neglected. But at the same time, neighborhoods were being remade. So the Soho that had once been, more industrial was now, with its industrial lofts, was now becoming a hub for young artists. And the South Street Seaport with places like Sloppy Louie's. And you would have read about these stories in sort of Joseph Mitchell stories, and at night it felt abandoned. You felt lonely, but you were also intrigued, and you felt like you were living in a world of kind of black and white photographs. I saw New York in black and white, and there was a lure for me, in the danger, but there was also art for me. In what I was seeing, so it was the photography of like a Ouija, the waterside scene.
You poor parents must be
and
terrified.
So the things you don't tell your parents.
Of course, you don't tell them anything.
My mother looks at me now and she says, "You never mentioned that," and I said, "No."
Why would I? Why would I? So great. So now you're in Columbia.
Yeah,
You're thriving. You're in New York City. The scene is set. I can see everything. I can see your friends. You're the Grateful Dead. I can see Bob Dylan. I see it all perfectly. So now you're studying, though, and you're still doing well. You finish that up from Columbia.
From Columbia, I then go to graduate school.
Okay, what do you get a
at
degree
Columbia,
in?
and my degree is in history.
In history.
Uh,
General history.
Um, modern European history was the field of specialization.
Okay.
When I was an undergraduate at Columbia, I managed to double major.
Okay.
And do history classes, kind of world history classes, American history classes, many European history classes, but history classes. But I also took a lot of literature classes, and I had great teachers. Stephen Marcus was one of my teachers, at Columbia. So I kind of double majored. So I had this interdisciplinary, interest. But for graduate school, I worked in history, and I was working on Spanish working class history. I was fascinated by the Spanish Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school, I had done interviews with people from the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, those young Americans, men and women, black and white, who'd volunteered to go and fight fascism after Francisco Franco led his generals in rebellion against the Spanish Republic.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky enough to meet fellows who'd fought in the Lincoln Brigade, and I was also fascinated by George Orwell and Ernest Hemingway and Arthur Koestler. So I was drawn to modern Spain and the forces that shaped modern Spain, and I wanted to write about a rebellion of mine workers in 1934.
As everyone does.
This is the moment where in life my daughter will sometimes turn to me and she said, "Dad, there's the 15-second version. There's the 5-minute version. There's the 45-minute version. There's the 2-hour version." She said, "All right." So maybe I'm going on a little bit too, but
I love it. Bring it on. It's fascinating to me.
It was
1934, mine workers.
So it's this rebellion against a government that had gone right wing, and it's going to precipitate the Spanish Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the extreme polarization of parties. You have people in Spain who are voting for the first time. It's the enfranchisement of women. You have field workers as well as industrial workers. In a world, the backdrop is the rise of fascism and the rise of totalitarian states and communism. So everything has become politicized. And then the Spanish Civil War itself is going to be the war that doesn't quite turn into World War II, but it divides the world internationally over who's going to supply assistance and who is not. And all of that, I thought, that mine workers' rebellion held the key to so much of the tragedy, of that. So I got my MA and I got my MPhil from Columbia, and then there was a period where life became difficult because I'm still in the PhD program. I'm working on my PhD, but in order to stay alive and in order to stay afloat, you need money.
Yeah.
And money in graduate school wasn't easy. So you are farming yourself out, teaching in different places. And even then, you're not being hired with full-time work in mind. You're not being hired with considerations about medical insurance or some kind of coverage. So like all adjuncts, you're living this sort of hand-to-mouth existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm teaching in several different colleges, in New York, and several different institutes. But I'm also taking jobs in other places just to pay the bills.
Right.
And there's a period where I was just exhausted.
Of course.
And I thought, this is no longer bringing me pleasure.
At this point, you're about 30?
I'm still in my 20s.
Okay.
I'm still in my 20s.
You're no longer getting joy. It's too much.
So I thought, let me look for other opportunities. And there's this other moment that I think you'd be fascinated by. I was sort of meeting with a bunch of graduate students who were interested in forming a graduate student union, and there are now graduate student unions all over the place, necessarily. In those days, universities Didn't want things like that. Didn't want the input, from below. So I was involved with people who were interested in forming a graduate student union. So there's the exhaustion from that, the exhaustion from the not feeling the immediate satisfaction, not getting the necessary paychecks, running from place to place. And I'm at a meeting, and we're introducing ourselves around the circle, and people are saying, "I'm so and so from the English department, so and so from history." And instead of my saying Bob Montera from the history department, I say Bob Montera from the Department of Music. And my friend Judy looks at me, and they continue to go around, and I say, I got to back up for a second. I said, I'm really from the Department of History, and I said the Department of Music. And what I realize is this. Music has played a crucial point in my life, and it has brought me joy. And right now I realize that I can't be here as a practicing historian, that the joy for it is no longer here for me, and that music, just saying that as a slip of the tongue, means like I'm walking out of graduate school right now.
Wow, come to Jesus moment.
So I walked away from graduate school, but thought I still needed a job, and I got this part-time job working at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center within their public health division at a thing called the Sergievsky Center, epidemiological research. So you've got to imagine, this is like 1979, 1980. I've gone there not because I see a career there, but because it's a paycheck and it's not history. But my academic training is useful, and my skills are appreciated. And I work with this fellow Mervyn Susser, his wife Zena Stain, and a number of other talented epidemiologists. And they were from South Africa, and they were opponents of apartheid, and they were gracious hosts to folks who were fleeing South Africa or who were part of the African National Congress. When Nelson Mandela comes to power, Mervyn Susser and his wife are called back to South Africa after being banned and living in exile to help create the South African healthcare system.
Terrific.
And I've stumbled into this because you can't plan for things like this. And Mervyn Susser became this other kind of mentor to me and gave me space to breathe for a couple of years at the same time that the AIDS epidemic is beginning in New York City. So I'm there in this gopher position, beginner's mind position, following these talented epidemiologists, and I've become a kind of a historian, sort of on the team. So I have this role and the training, and it's useful. And that New York of the 1970s is now New York of the 80s, and there's a new crisis that has to be faced. And it gives this immediate and human face to everything that you do. Your compassion is awakened, and you realize that whatever your skills are can be so useful and life-saving. And at that point, I begin to interweave this connection that research and history and teaching is a health science if done properly. Sort of like lives are at risk, and restoring health to the body politique, and all the folks within society who've been neglected. And that's a big revelation.
Sure.
And so you feel this great sense of purpose. So from the loss of purpose, now to feeling this purpose. So which direction would I go? Would I go into the world of epidemiology? And Mervyn wanted to he said it'll be a free ride.
Wow.
We'll pay for you. We recognize your talent. To have that recognition is wonderful.
Amazing.
It's at that time that I see an advertisement in the New York Times. This is 1984, to teach full-time in New York City public school system because there's a teacher shortage.
Okay, as what? A history teacher?
And I apply as a history teacher. There was something about the advertisement that reawakened in me.
Wow.
How crazy?
So you hit this crossroads.
So I hit this crossroads, and there was something about teaching high school that seemed true, and that being a teacher seemed like no, I don't want to go into epidemiology. I want to use my knowledge of epidemiology, but there's a truer Bob Montera self still wedded to the historical work. So I work in the New York public school system.
Incredible. 11 years after high school graduation, right?
Yeah.
So you've already had a lot of work, tons of experience.
Yeah.
And now you get the cushy gig.
It's it's a little bit like an episode of Welcome Back, Kotter, kind of thing. And it was a transformative period of time.
Sounds like
an experience with people who were real characters, and the pressures were intense. 5 classes, meeting 5 days a week, and I haven't taken any teacher training. I've been thrown into it because there's a shortage. As a new teacher, you're taking extra classes with administrators like John Mooney in the evening, so they can bring you up to speed. In the world of pedagogy, new world. But I'm also with 2 people that I meet, kind of that first day or so. John Lunam, who's just retired from teaching and who's having a short story collection published this year, and who's a wonderful writer, and a guy named David Bronstein. The 3 of us connect, and if you can imagine, in one way, we're thriving in the classroom. But to prepare for that classroom, you're just being battered and you're overwhelmed. But each night, we're staying late at school. We're grading all the essays or papers that we need to grade, doing our homework prep. And each day, we're walking David home to 168th Street, and we're debriefing from the day. So I have these 2 valuable new friends, and we're critiquing each other, and we're critiquing ourselves. And the best experience I've ever had in terms of teacher training and professional development is with them, and bonding with them, as friends, and learning how to become a teacher, because each day we figured out where do we mess up and how could we improve. And we would go back into the classroom the next day and apply all of those lessons that we learned. So it was
smart. And then so you're
all the other people are washing out.
Yeah.
We're still in there, and I worked there for a while. But then,
how long did you make it there?
I was there for a year.
1 year.
I was there for a year.
And then what?
And this is what happened.
What happened, Bob?
This is the first of how many episodes? As that year went on, I didn't have a sense of myself 5 years down the road.
Okay.
I saw a lot of people were burning out.
Wow.
And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see what it's like at other schools? And I had forgotten that I had done a mass mailing of resumes. That's the word I couldn't think of. Resumes. At one point in my life. And all of a sudden, there were these nibbles for resumes, and people saying, "Would you come and interview at our school? Could we see you give a lesson?" And I got a nibble from a lovely woman, Danielle Kruger, later became Danielle Kruger Nyman, who was the chair of the history department at the Fieldston School. And she said, "I have your resume." She said, I'd love you to come up and watch you teach." And I said, I don't know if I can take off from work. Could you come down and watch me teach where I am? And she knew the school, A. Philip Randolph Campus High School. It used to be the High School of Music and Art. And she came down, let herself in the back door, knew the elevator guy.
Smooth.
And then stayed for my first period class. And at the end of the first period class, she said, "Do you mind if I stay for your second class?" I said, "Fine." Then she said, "Do you mind if I stay for your third class?" So she watched me teach 3 classes. And then she came up to me at the end of that third class, and she said, "Yes, it's unusual that I stayed. I wanted to see if the second class was going to be as good as the first class, and if the third class, if you still had the sort of stamina and interest." And she said, "I don't often do this. I want to make you a job offer now." And she said, it's a leave replacement for 1 year in the history department at the Fieldston School. It's an independent school. It's a progressive school. I knew nothing. I'd never heard of it. That wasn't my world.
This is 85?
This is
86?
This is 1985. This is the spring. This is the spring of 1985. The spring of 1985.
That's when I was born.
We have anniversaries sort of coming up. So she says it'll last for a year, but you'll get a great experience. And I thought, I've never been a risk taker. I've always been cautious. I've always managed my money conservatively. What little money I've had, conservatively. And I said, let's do it. Let's do it. And I started teaching at Fieldston, which was, I'd never met kids like them. I'd never met faculty like them. The librarians, when I was a new teacher, I didn't have a classroom. The librarians said, why don't you use the library as your classroom, as your base camp? A lady named Judy Nosselson opened up the Tate Library to me. And I had such a wonderful experience just bringing the best of what I knew how to do with kids and colleagues who were just very receptive. I could experiment. Teachers voiced their opinions more freely, and the school was open to kind of innovation, and there was kind of a neat connection over the generations that I could see that I'd never seen at any other school before. And that's part of, I think, the private school experience, but I think it's also what's unique about Fieldston and its roots kind of in ethical culture and in the working class, the working man's school of the 1870s, and then evolving into this. So it was neat, but it was only going to be a year. And when I went to Danielle to say, would you write me a recommendation? She said, the principal wants to see you first, Mr. Kenneth Barton, who was the principal. And he said, we don't have a position for you in history. He said, but there are positions in ethics and positions in English. Do you think you could teach either? And I said, well, I double majored in English. He said, well, why don't you interview with ethics and with English? And I was interviewed by the chair of the English department, John Awney, whose first question was, so do you read? What do you read? Tell me about what you read. We talked for 2 hours. And at the end of that, he said, yeah. And I've been in Fieldston since the fall of 1985.
Wow.
This is my sabbatical year. Was it like 39 years?
Wow, almost 40
almost
years.
40 years. Almost 40 years.
Sabbatical
the same
year.
school. Sabbatical year. And when I return to Fieldston in the fall, I'll be returning full-time in the fall. And for the next bunch of years, I like to think of this as I enter, like I'm turning 70. As I enter my 70 to 80 decade, I'm thinking of this as working in the fall and then taking off in the spring.
Okay.
And the school has agreed to that.
Great. Of course.
And as long as I'm healthy and happy and can make a contribution, this gives me more time with my family. My wife is a retired Spanish teacher, and I met her at Fieldston. And it was romance.
Beautiful.
And it still is romance.
Of course.
And my two kids, Adam and Rose, went to Fieldston. And Adam's in the Marine Corps. United States Marine.
Wow.
And Rose works at an organization called STAT, which is medical news, and she lives in Boston. And it's kind of like what Bloomberg News was when it started out. STAT is a way of kind of like building connections, and she's part of that. So all the epidemiology she had to listen to me talk about at the dinner table has really paid off. I'm taking a small cut, and I think Adam in the Marine Corps is also he's an avid historian and believes in service and is thriving.
Terrific
In the Corps. And my wife is thriving in retirement as an artist, and she worked so much harder than I've ever worked as a Spanish teacher. Okay. I think language teachers, it's that immersive experience, and it's conjuring up the immediate magic of the classroom to convince you you're 1,000 miles away. And she was wonderful at it. She becomes a different person when she speaks Castilian or when she speaks Catalan. It's a whole other person. So I get many identities when I'm hanging out, with her to enjoy. But she's happy in retirement, painting and drawing and writing fiction.
Cool. Very cool. And the Catalan, that's like a region of Spain, right?
Yes, it is.
Right.
Yes,
so
it is.
It has its own dialect.
It has its own language.
Right.
So
it's not even a dialect.
So right. So it's part of the Romance language, a family. So, Castilian is through other parts of Spain, but in the northeast corner of Spain is Catalunya or Catalonia. Sometimes you'll hear people say, but Catalunya. Barcelona is the capital of Catalonia. And they have a very fierce, identity. When Spain was coming into existence, the Castilian kings are, conquering the other sections of Spain, and you have other linguistic groups in Spain. So the Basques are a different linguistic
Right.
groups, and the Galicians different linguistic groups. They sort of pull them all into one kingdom against their will, and the Catalans, have this mixed relationship, and they feel very much conquered.
Right.
By Castile, but but sometimes sometimes there's a mutuality to it. That's also a necessity. So when we talk to friends who are in Catalonia, there are those who say, in order to be a viable nation, we've got to be part of this. And then there are the others who are like, no,
Right.
no.
It's like my family with Northern Ireland.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's tons of history there. But anyway, is there somewhere we can? Do you have any work that you've published or anything where our listeners and our Nyack people? Oh yeah, we got to get to the Nyack portion of your story.
Because I come to Nyack while I'm teaching at Fieldston, living in Astoria, Queens for many, many years.
Uh-huh.
The kids are born, and raised in kind of Queens. But early on, my wife wanted. We looked for housing in Queens and couldn't afford it. And there was no turnover. And we wanted to live in Astoria because Astoria is God's country in the same way that Queens is God's blessing. And it was close to my parents, but it really was. There's something about Astoria. It's a magical place. But there was nothing that we could afford there.
Right.
So we were looking elsewhere, and there was nothing in Westchester that we could afford.
Right.
And the chair of the English department, John Awney, who just passed away, is a lifelong Nyack resident. He said, come to Nyack and look around. I think you'll be happy with it. And his joke has always been, we bought the last affordable house in Nyack over on Sickles Avenue. And that's when I became a Nyack resident.
Ah. So when was that?
1998, October of 1998, we come to Nyack.
So you've been here for 25 years.
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible. And now that you've been a Nyack resident for so long, my previous guest, Joe Gareffo, thanks, Joe. Him and I talked about this magical quality that Nyack seems to possess that draws you in. And there's an abundance of intellectuals, musicians, artists, and inside of Rockland County, that's not a thing.
I've learned that.
With the exception of here, maybe to a lesser degree.
People migrate.
Piermont,
here.
yeah.
People come here for the.
There's a gravity. There's a gravity here, and for people who are watching this or listening to this, if you come here, you're stuck here basically. You are. I've tried to leave twice. I can't. I keep coming back. If you come here, you just keep coming back. Like Joe was talking about his experience where he just decided he saw an ad for the Time Hotel.
Yeah.
Which is now the Nyack Hotel.
Yeah.
And he just stayed there. And then they walked to town and they were like, what is this? They went to the library, which, by the way, I used to work at the Nyack Library.
Oh my God! Yeah. I might know that. Maybe I know you from then. You're beginning to look familiar in a whole new way.
Yes, worked there for like a decade. It was one of my first good jobs when I moved to the area. I was circulation department and computer resource center.
Oh my God!
Yeah, and I would write short stories and stuff there during my downtime. I had this one called Ninjas versus Nazis.
Oh my God!
Yeah, which was my concept was. And somebody really needs to write this book. Please do it.
You're the person who needs to write it.
Yeah, you're right. Is that post-World War II?
My has become very loud. Have I touched something, or
potentially, yeah. You can raise it with that or lower it with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's better.
There you go.
Because wow.
All of a sudden, whoa.
No, that was remarkable.
Right. So Ninjas versus Nazis. Help me on this one, public people who are watching this. Is post-World War II, the Japanese and the Nazis won and defeated the Allied forces. And the concept is then they split America down the middle and essentially the whole world down the middle.
Yes.
And then eventually they have to fight. And I off-colored called it Ninjas versus Nazis just as a funny idea. Maybe Quentin Tarantino will take that on.
If he's listening now, may the folks in the arts scene hear that.
Yeah.
I know Sigourney Weaver's coming to town. Sigourney, are you listening?
Great.
Please relay this to various producers.
Great. I'll tell you the whole sordid detail. Anyway.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah. So just to wrap it up.
So this relationship with Nyack, I will tell you, there are certain things that I fell in love with immediately, and there were other things where I was aloof because I was so distraught over leaving Astoria, but I was still living most of my days, in the Bronx, teaching, in the Bronx. We had this beautiful little house, and still have it on Sickles, Avenue. So Nyack was a series of slow awakenings for me. And what I loved about Nyack almost immediately was my conditions were it had to have public access so I could get into Manhattan, but I needed to be near a really good library. So the library rooted me in Nyack, and it's a beautiful Carnegie library. But then the Pickwick bookstore rooted me further, and is still a dazzling place. And the owner is just this wonderful raconteur, but he knows his books, and the books are like tidal waves, just. But there was also a place called the Ben Franklin bookstore. So the world of books was that first draw for me. My son found a connection with a place called Barracks Gate, which was a military toys. But then later became kind of the Lego place for years. And Adam would go and do builds at the Lego store and work at the Lego store. And Lego folks also did construction work, private contracting. So he had a series of relationships that sort of like grew out of it. But for me, it was centered around books. And performance centers, and the library was also a great performance center for classical music. And 1 year, and this connects us to you again. I was very fond of a band called Finn and the Sharks, and a guy named Billy Ruse is the lead guitarist, and he has a wonderful brother who's a multi-instrumentalist. And they have their own band, Southwind Twisters, but they also did a presentation at the Nyack Public Library on American music. And it was both acoustic and blues, and it was from work song and blues, to jazz and rock and roll. And in a 2-hour, what I thought was going to be a talk was really a concert with them talking in between songs. And I turned to my wife at one point, and I said, I would love to be able to do what they've done.
Yeah.
To have that range and that set of skills. I said, someday maybe I'll take a lesson.
Here we are.
Which eventually became this. And then Nyack has just become, for me, great food, great arts. I go all of the time to Main Street Beat for CDs and for for records, but just wonderful places to dine, like the Deli on Hudson coffee, which I brought in this morning. Remarkable, and restaurants are sort of always opening and closing, but those that endure really are endlessly satisfying and filled with surprises and deliver just first-class tastes. So the Hudson House or Tarantella, pizza, Runcible Spoon, Strawberries, the Art Cafe. There's a new little coffee shop that opened across the street from the gas station, in town that has like a fancy name, but it's delightful.
Solinaire. Yeah. Oh, and Up South Twisters is Billy Ruse's other band.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With Billy and Muddy.
Yes.
Shout out to Up South
Muddy.
Twisters.
I couldn't remember his name. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got the Jazz Cellar.
Yeah.
Over here. So Nyack is this real package, and kind of like Barcelona. It faces the Hudson. It faces the world. It brings you out to things internationally. It's up against the cliffs, right? And the right. But it also has that little passageway into the American hinterland. But I think there's something about it. It's like you're in an amphitheater, and you look down on the Hudson River, and you can see all the strata of Nyack existence, and it pulls you in.
Yeah.
It physically pulls you in.
It does.
And the Hudson roots you. So whether or not you're a walker or a diner, I'm a runner. So, I'm running to Piermont, and I'm running to Haverstraw, but I'm also running over, Christian Herald Road. I'm taking the hump, over to 303 and then in through the state park. It feels complete. Other towns in Rockland don't have the charm of it,
Mm.
aren't as welcoming.
Mm.
And I said to my wife, you aren't always able to find the town center. And Nyack feels very centered, and you know kind of where the center of things, is.
100%. 100%. And in that center is the center of gravity. I love the amphitheater idea, is that it's because it just kind of blossoms out of that
Right,
amphitheater,
right.
and it's just this little bowl of
Yes.
civilization
Yes.
right here. All right, Mr. Bob Montera, this was a great, great pleasure.
Oh my God.
Thank
Oh
you
my
so
God.
much for doing the Rock Shop Community Podcast. Where
What a treat. What a treat.
Yeah.
And but at your place,
Yeah.
this is a hub.
Yeah.
This place is a very welcoming hub where you're learning skills, but also it's like a crossroads.
Sure.
So thank you for the lessons, but thank you for the additional lessons that you've provided.
Sure. And the community. It's all about community here at the Rock Shop. I'm leaning into that as hard as I can lean into it because I found that we created
Yes.
a whole new community.
Yes.
And then of that community, little mini communities are coming off of that. And I just find that what else could you possibly be doing with your life other than sharing these kinds of gifts with people? And to somehow have turned it,
Yeah.
segued it into a career is wild. I used to be like, yeah, I play music, I'm a musician, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I actually own this store. And
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
now I'm a pillar of this community, Bob, which is crazy, dude.
I know you say it ironically, but brilliant musician, brilliant teacher, but civic minded,
Yeah.
In an old fashioned sense of civic activism and civic care and the notion of building community and,
Yeah.
and mutuality.
Yeah.
So thank you, my friend.
Sure. And thank you, Bob. My pleasure, sir.
Oh my God. My God.
All right. Rock Shop Community Podcast signing out. Peace out, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Bravo. Bravo. That was so much fun.
You killed it.
Was it good?